For gate agent Bernadette Price, it was just another Tuesday power trip, a chance to enforce the rules, especially the unwritten ones, that made her feel important. Standing at the gate for Zenith Airlines, Flight 712 to London, she saw a passenger she instantly deemed unacceptable. It wasn't about the ticket, it was about the person. In that moment, Bernadette drew a line in the sand, a simple act of denial she believed would have no consequences. It was a decision that would not just cost her a job, but would ignite a corporate firestorm and expose a sickness hiding in plain sight. She had no idea the woman she'd just publicly humiliated didn't just have a ticket. She owned the entire airline. The controlled chaos of John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony to Dr. Marina Worth. It was a noise she usually observed from the serene, hushed sanctuary of the Zenith Airlines flagship lounge, a space she had personally helped design. But today was different. She was flying incognito, a deliberate choice. She was on her way to London to finalize the most significant acquisition in her company's history, a multi-billion-dollar deal to absorb a smaller, innovative European carrier, propelling Zenith into the stratosphere of global aviation. The final negotiations were delicate, and the current COO of the target company, a stuffy old guard traditionalist named Alistair Finch, had already expressed skepticism about a company run by new money. Marina wanted to arrive without fanfare as a regular passenger to get a ground-level feel for the transatlantic experience her customers were receiving. She was dressed for the 9-hour flight in a way that prioritized comfort over corporate performance. A pair of tailored, high-end navy blue joggers, a simple white cashmere sweater, and a pair of pristine, fashionable sneakers. Her hair was styled in intricate, elegant cornrows, a crown she wore with pride. On her wrist was a simple, understated watch, which, to a discerning eye, was a Patek Philippe, worth more than the average car, but its quiet elegance drew no attention. She carried no flashy designer handbag, just a sleek, practical leather backpack containing her laptop, a formidable stack of legal documents, and a well-loved novel. To anyone who bothered to look, she was just another traveler. Successful, perhaps, but unremarkable in the sea of faces rushing towards their destinations. And that was precisely the point. Dr. Marina Worth, the founder and majority shareholder of Zenith Airlines, the prodigy who had dropped out of Stanford with a revolutionary logistics algorithm and built an empire from scratch, was hiding in plain sight. She approached Gate B24, where the organized scrum of priority boarding was already underway. She held a first-class ticket, but she waited patiently in the line, observing. She noted the harried but efficient way one agent scanned tickets, the forced smile on his face. She saw families struggling with strollers, business travelers tapping furiously on their phones. This was her world, the world she had built, and she was seeing it through the eyes of a customer. Finally, she reached the front of the line. The gate agent, a woman with a name tag that read Bernadette, looked up. Her eyes, sharp and judgmental, did a swift, dismissive scan of Marina from head to toe. The agent's lips tightened into a thin, disapproving line. Bernadette Price, known as Betty to her colleagues, was a woman who wielded her small measure of authority like a cudgel. She had been with the airline for 15 years, long before the Worth takeover, as she resentfully called it, and she felt a misplaced sense of ownership over its standards. "Good afternoon," Marina said, offering a warm, genuine smile as she held out her passport and boarding pass. Bernadette didn't return the smile. She took the documents, her fingers tapping impatiently on the counter. She scanned the boarding pass, then looked back at Marina, her gaze lingering on the joggers. "I'm sorry," Bernadette said, her voice dripping with artificial politeness that failed to mask its sharp, condescending edge. We have a dress code for our first-class cabin. Marina blinked, genuinely confused. She had written the company's policies herself. There was a code of conduct for passengers regarding offensive slogans or lack of footwear, but certainly no rule against clean, high-end leisure wear. "I'm sorry," Marina repeated, her smile faltering slightly. "I believe I'm dressed appropriately for a long-haul flight." "Our first-class experience is a premium one," Bernadette continued, puffing out her chest slightly. She was enjoying this. The other passengers in the line were beginning to stare. "It's about maintaining a certain standard. Joggers and sneakers are not part of that standard. It's more for the lounge or the gym." The statement hung in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice. It wasn't about the clothes, it was about the person wearing them. In Bernadette's narrow worldview, a black woman in cornrows and joggers did not belong in the exclusive cabin she was paid to guard. Marina kept her composure, a skill honed in countless boardrooms where she was the only woman and the only person of color. "I can assure you these clothes are clean and presentable. Could you please show me where this dress code is stipulated in the company policy or the terms of carriage?" Bernadette's face soured. She hated being questioned. "It's a matter of discretion. Management's discretion. And my manager will agree with me." She gestured vaguely behind her. "We can't have the cabin looking like a common waiting room." The word common was a deliberate, poisoned dart. Marina felt a familiar sting of anger, but she buried it deep. Getting angry now would solve nothing. It would only feed the narrative this woman was already writing in her head. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Marina said, her voice dropping to a calm, dangerously quiet tone. "Fine," Bernadette snapped, picking up her radio. "Greg, I need you at B24. I have a passenger who is disputing the dress code." The call was a declaration of war. The line behind Marina grew longer, the whispers louder. People were filming on their phones now. Marina stood her ground, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with a cold, rising fury. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was an insult, an attack on her dignity, happening on her own territory. And Bernadette Price had no idea the battle she had just picked. Gregory Bishop arrived with the unhurried swagger of a man who believed his authority was absolute. He was a portly man in his late 50s, his uniform straining slightly at the seams, his face flushed with the self-importance of a middle manager. He had a reputation for siding with his staff, no matter what, believing that backing your people was the cornerstone of management, even when his people were demonstrably in the wrong. It was the path of least resistance, and Greg's entire career was built on that path. He didn't make eye contact with Marina at first. He walked directly to Bernadette, leaning in conspiratorially. "What's the problem, Betty?" he asked, his voice low but audible to those nearby. "This passenger," Bernadette said, gesturing at Marina with a flick of her head, as if she were a piece of luggage left in the walkway. "She's refusing to accept our first-class dress code policy. She's wearing track pants." Greg finally turned to Marina. His eyes performed the same dismissive inventory check as Bernadette's had, but with an added layer of weary paternalism. "Ma'am," he began, the word ma'am sounding more like an accusation than a courtesy. "I understand you're upset, but we do have certain standards of presentation on Zenith Airlines. It's what keeps us a premium carrier." "With all due respect," Marina replied, her voice still steady, a stark contrast to the brewing storm within her. "I have flown first class with this airline dozens of times. I have also read the official terms of carriage, which I helped draft. There is no policy against the attire I am currently wearing. I am asking you to either point to the specific rule I am breaking, or allow me to board my flight." Her articulate, precise language seemed to throw Greg off. He had expected shouting, maybe tears, an emotional outburst he could easily dismiss as hysteria. He exchanged a nervous glance with Bernadette. They were used to winning these little power plays through sheer condescension and the threat of making a scene. "It's not a written rule, per se," Greg said, floundering. "It's an expectation, an understanding. Our most valuable clients appreciate an environment of decorum." The implication was clear. You are not one of our most valuable clients. So, you're operating on an unwritten, unpublished rule that is enforced at the whim of your gate staff. Marina pressed, her tone sharpening like a lawyer cross-examining a hostile witness. "And you believe that is a legally defensible position for a publicly traded international airline?" The mention of legality and public trading made Greg flinch. This woman was more articulate than he'd anticipated. But backing down now, in front of his subordinate and a growing audience of passengers, was unthinkable. His ego wouldn't allow it. "Look, you can either change into something more appropriate," he said, his voice hardening, "or we can rebook you on a later flight, in economy, where the dress code is more relaxed." It was a blatant, insulting demotion, a punishment for daring to question them. The small crowd gasped. A man behind Marina muttered, "That's unbelievable." Marina felt the ground shift beneath her. This was no longer just a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of humiliation. She reached into her backpack, but instead of pulling out a change of clothes, she drew out her phone. With a few discreet taps, she started a voice recording. "So, let me be perfectly clear," she said, her voice now carrying a new weight of authority that made both Greg and Bernadette uneasy. "You are denying me, a ticketed, confirmed first-class passenger, boarding on Flight 712 to London, not because of any written policy, but because of your personal, subjective judgment of my clothing. And you are offering to downgrade my ticket as a solution. Is that correct?" "We are not going to be interrogated," Bernadette snapped, her face turning a blotchy red. "You are causing a scene and holding up the boarding process." "I am the one being held up," Marina corrected her calmly. "I will ask one last time. Are you going to honor my ticket and allow me to board this aircraft?" Greg saw his chance to end the confrontation. He puffed up his chest and stepped forward, using his physical presence to try and intimidate her. "No. Your attitude is becoming disruptive. I am the station manager, and my decision is final. You are not getting on this flight. Step aside, or I will be forced to call airport security." The threat was the final straw. It was the ultimate weapon of the petty tyrant, summoning a higher power to crush dissent. Marina looked at him, then at Bernadette, whose face was alight with a triumphant smirk. They had won. They had put the woman in the joggers in her place. Without another word, Marina stepped back from the counter. She did not argue further. She did not raise her voice. She simply nodded, a slow, deliberate gesture that was terrifying in its calmness. "I see," she said softly. "You've made your position very clear." She turned and walked away from the gate, the whispers and stares of the other passengers following her like a wake. Greg and Bernadette watched her go, smug and self-satisfied. They shared a look of mutual victory. They had protected the standards of Zenith Airlines. They had no inkling that they hadn't just denied a passenger. They had judged, sentenced, and executed their own careers. And the woman walking away wasn't heading for the exit. She was heading for her war room. Marina found a quiet corner near a departure board, its constantly flipping letters a blur of destinations she could no longer reach. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a glacial calm that always preceded her most decisive actions. Humiliation had curdled into pure, unadulterated focus. This was no longer a personal affront. It was a systemic failure, a cancer within her own company. Bernadette and Greg were not the disease. They were the symptoms. She pulled out her phone. Her first call was not to a customer service line or a complaints department. It was to a number on her encrypted speed dial, labeled DR1. Donovan Reed, the chief operating officer of Zenith Airlines and Marina's most trusted confidant for over a decade, answered on the first ring. "Marina, you should be in the air. Everything all right with the pre-takeoff checks?" "Change of plans, Donovan." Marina's voice was low and even, betraying no emotion. "We have a code Indigo at JFK, Terminal 4, Gate B24, Flight 7112. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. A code Indigo was a protocol Marina herself had created. It was reserved for critical, brand-damaging incidents involving high-level corporate failure or malfeasance. It had only been used twice before, once during a major data breach, and once when an employee was caught smuggling contraband on a company jet. It triggered an immediate, no-questions-asked mobilization of the company's senior leadership and legal teams. "Understood." Donovan's voice was suddenly clipped and serious. "Are you safe?" "I'm fine. I've just been denied boarding on my own airline," she said, the absurdity of the statement hanging in the air. "Station manager Gregory Bishop and gate agent Bernadette Price. The reason cited was a violation of a non-existent first-class dress code. They threatened to call security." Donovan let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. Marina could hear the furious clicking of a keyboard. Donovan was a force of nature, a man who could command armies of lawyers and executives with a single email. He was the hammer to her scalpel. "Okay," he came back, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I'm pulling every digital and physical record associated with that gate for the last hour. Security footage from 5 different angles, audio logs from the counter, full employee files on Bishop and Price, including every single performance review and passenger complaint ever filed against them. It will all be on a secure server within 20 minutes. "Good," Marina said. "Second, I still need to get to London. The Finch meeting is in 36 hours. I can't be late. Get me the Gulf Stream. File a flight plan out of Teterboro. I'll take a car there now. And Donovan, nobody on that plane, not the pilots, not the flight attendant, is to know who I am until we land. I want the standard anonymous charter experience. I need my head clear. The G650 is being fueled as we speak. A black Escalade will meet you at passenger pickup, lower level, in 10 minutes. Driver's name is Ector. He'll be holding a sign that says Worth. Perfect. One last thing. Loop in Penelope Shaw. Tell her to cancel her afternoon. I want a preliminary legal strategy on my tablet before I'm over the Atlantic. I want to know every possible avenue, from wrongful termination to a class action lawsuit for discriminatory practices. I want to know how deep this rot goes." Penelope Shaw was Zenith's head of legal, a woman so formidable it was rumored she made other lawyers cry during depositions. A code Indigo with Penelope involved meant the situation had escalated from a corporate problem to a potential cataclysm. "Consider it done, Marina," Donovan said, his voice grim. "We'll burn them to the ground." "No," Marina corrected him, her voice as cold as the glass window she was staring through. "We're not just going to burn them down. We're going to use this. We're going to rip out the infection and rebuild the bone stronger. Get to work." She hung up. As she walked towards the escalators, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Donovan. It contained 2 PDF attachments. One was the complete, unblemished employment file of Bernadette Betty Price. The other belonged to Gregory Bishop, A quick scan revealed what she suspected: a history littered with minor complaints, all of them dismissed by Greg himself. Complaints about rudeness, inflexibility, and a recurring theme of unprofessional discretion, disproportionately targeting minority passengers. It was a pattern, a dirty little secret hidden in plain sight, protected by a lazy manager and a corporate culture that had clearly grown complacent. As she stepped out into the crisp New York air, the black Escalade pulled up to the curb precisely on schedule. The driver, Hector, a large, professional man, stepped out and opened the door without a word. Sliding into the plush leather interior, Marina finally allowed herself a moment. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal in her chest. But it was now tempered by something else: resolve. This was no longer about a ruined trip or a personal insult. Bernadette and Greg had given her an accidental, ugly gift. They had exposed a rot that ran deeper than she ever imagined. They thought they had denied boarding to a woman in joggers. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to their own destruction and the blueprint for a corporate reformation to the one person on Earth who could actually bring it all to bear: their owner. While Marina was being whisked away to a private airfield in New Jersey, a silent digital tsunami was tearing through the corporate headquarters of Zenith Airlines in Chicago. Donovan Reed's Code Indigo activation had descended upon the executive floor like a declaration of martial law. Meetings were cancelled, non-essential staff were sent home. A core team of senior VPs, legal counsel, and HR directors were summoned to the main boardroom, their phones confiscated at the door to prevent leaks. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension. Robert Maxwell, the silver-haired senior vice president of North American operations, a man who had been with the airline since the pre-war era, paced nervously. He saw this as a direct failure of his division. "What do we have, Donovan?" Robert asked, his voice strained. Donovan stood at the head of the massive mahogany table, a tablet in his hand, projecting onto a massive screen at the front of the room. "What we have, Robert, is a complete and utter institutional failure." He played the first file. It was the high-definition security footage from above Gate B-24. The video had no sound, but the scene was damningly clear. It showed Marina's calm approach, Bernadette's sneering dismissal, and Greg's pompous, intimidating posture. It showed Marina being forced to step aside, while dozens of other passengers, some in shorts, some in flip-flops, some in garish t-shirts, were waved through without a second glance. Next, he played the audio log from the gate counter's microphone. The condescending, venomous words of Bernadette and Greg filled the silent, horrified boardroom. "It's more for the lounge or the gym. Can't have the cabin looking like a common waiting room. Rebook you in economy, where the dress code is more relaxed. Your attitude is becoming disruptive." Penelope Shaw, the head of legal, listened with her eyes closed, her expression turning to stone. When the recording ended with Greg's threat to call security, she finally spoke. "They didn't just break company policy," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "They may have broken federal law. This is a textbook case of consumer racial profiling. The fact that they invented a non-existent rule to enforce their own prejudice is not just grounds for termination. It's grounds for a federal investigation into our company's practices. We're exposed here, horribly." Donovan then projected the employee files onto the screen. He highlighted 17 separate passenger complaints filed against Bernadette Price over the last 3 years. 12 of those complaints were from people of color. All 17 had been investigated and subsequently dismissed by one person, her direct supervisor, Gregory Bishop. A junior VP gasped. He was burying her complaints to protect her or to avoid the paperwork. "It doesn't matter what his motive was," Penelope countered, her eyes flashing. What matters is that he cultivated and enabled a pattern of discriminatory behavior within his own team. From a legal standpoint, the company is now vicariously liable for every single one of those incidents because a manager was actively covering it up. The room fell silent. The scale of the problem was becoming terrifyingly clear. This wasn't just two rogue employees. It was a management failure of the highest order. Meanwhile, at JFK, Bernadette and Greg were finishing their shift, completely oblivious to the storm gathering above their heads. They were in the staff break room, congratulating themselves. "You should have seen her face, Greg," Bernadette said, laughing as she stirred sugar into her coffee. All high and mighty with her fancy talk. "Legally defensible position," she mimicked in a high-pitched, mocking voice. "Some people just think they can get away with anything." "You did the right thing, Betty," Greg said, patting her shoulder. "We have to maintain standards. That's what the old guard would have wanted. It's all gone downhill since that tech woman took over. All about algorithms and efficiency, no respect for tradition." "Exactly," Bernadette agreed eagerly. "She probably filed a complaint. It'll come to your desk, you'll dismiss it like you always do, and we'll never hear from her again." "That's the system," Greg said with a satisfied grin. "It works." Their casual, smug conversation was a chilling counterpoint to the crisis unfolding miles away. They believed they were untouchable, safe within their tiny fiefdom, protected by a system Greg himself had corrupted. Back in Chicago, the plan was being set. "We can't just fire them," Robert Maxwell said, his face pale. The union will be a non-issue," Penelope Shaw interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We have them on gross misconduct, willful discrimination, creating a hostile environment for a passenger, and falsifying reports by dismissing legitimate complaints. We have audio, video, and a paper trail a mile long. The union will advise them to resign immediately to avoid a lawsuit." Donovan nodded. "But a quiet resignation isn't enough. This can't be swept under the rug." Marina was clear. "We're not just punishing, we're making a statement. We're going to use this as a catalyst." He outlined the plan. Greg and Bernadette would be placed on immediate administrative leave, pending an urgent operational review. Their system access would be revoked the second they clocked out. They would be summoned to a meeting at the regional headquarters at 9 o'clock the following morning. They would be told it was a standard debrief about the incident. They would walk into that meeting expecting a slap on the wrist, perhaps even a commendation for their discretion. Instead, they would be walking into the corporate equivalent of a public execution, and the executioner wouldn't be some anonymous HR director. "Marina's plane lands at Luton in 6 hours, Donovan announced to the room. "She'll take a few hours to rest, then she'll be patched in via high-definition video conference. She wants to be there. She wants them to see her." The jaws of the trap had been set. All that was left was for the prey to walk into it, fat, happy, and utterly unaware. The next morning, Bernadette Price chose her outfit with care. She picked her best navy blue pantsuit and a crisp white blouse. A meeting at regional headquarters was a big deal. She and Greg had been summoned via an email from Robert Maxwell's office, the senior VP of North American Operations, for an urgent operational review meeting. Bernadette's mind was racing with possibilities. Maybe they were being recognized for their firm stance on upholding standards. Maybe this was the promotion she'd been waiting for. Greg was equally optimistic, though he masked it with a show of nonchalant confidence. "Probably just a formality, Betty," he said, as they met in the lobby of the sleek corporate building near the airport. "They have to follow up on the passenger's complaint. We'll tell our side of the story, they'll tick their boxes, and we'll be back at the gate by lunch." They rode the elevator up to the 25th floor, their moods buoyed by a shared sense of vindication. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by a stern-looking assistant who led them not to a small office, but to the main executive boardroom. The first prickle of unease settled in when they saw who was waiting for them. Seated around the long, polished table were Robert Maxwell, the senior VP, Penelope Shaw, the notoriously formidable head of the entire legal department, the regional director of human resources, and two other executives whose faces they only recognized from the company's annual report. This was not a debrief. This was an inquisition. "Mr. Bishop, Miss Price, please have a seat," Robert Maxwell said, his voice devoid of any warmth. He gestured to the two empty chairs at the far end of the table, directly facing a large, dark television screen. They sat, the silence in the room pressing down on them. Greg's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a sheen of nervous sweat on his forehead. Bernadette fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "We've called you here today to discuss an incident that occurred yesterday at Gate B24 with Flight 712, Robert began, his tone glacial. Specifically, the denial of boarding to a first-class passenger. "We were simply upholding company policy," Greg blurted out, his voice a little too loud. "The passenger was dressed inappropriately and became disruptive." Penelope Shaw arched a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Disruptive?" "That's interesting, Mr. Bishop, because the audio recordings from the gate counter and the testimony from a dozen other passengers suggest she was calm and articulate, while you were the one who became threatening." Before Greg could respond, the large screen at the end of the table flickered to life. The image that appeared was crystal clear, a high-definition video feed from what looked like a luxurious office or hotel suite. Seated in a large leather chair was a woman. It was the passenger from the day before. Bernadette gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Greg's face went white, the color draining from it as if a plug had been pulled. The woman on the screen was not wearing joggers and a sweater. She was dressed in a razor-sharp, dark teal business suit. Her hair was the same, but it now looked less like a casual style and more like the regal crown it was. Her expression was calm, her eyes piercing and intelligent. She looked powerful. She looked like she belonged in this room far more than they did. "Hello, Gregory." "Bernadette," she said. Her voice was the same, but stripped of its politeness. It was now pure steel. "We meet again, though I suppose a formal introduction is in order. I am Dr. Marina Worth." She paused, letting the name sink in. Greg and Bernadette looked at each other in utter confusion. The name meant nothing to them. Robert Maxwell leaned forward. "Dr. Worth," he said, his voice dripping with a deference that shocked them, "is the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of Zenith Airlines." The world stopped. The air in Bernadette's lungs turned to ice. She felt a dizzying, sickening vertigo, as if the floor had just dropped away from beneath her feet. Greg made a small, choking sound, his jaw slack with disbelief. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, and banished from the gate. Their boss? Not just their boss, but the ultimate authority. The owner. The one who signed every single paycheck, including theirs. "You seem surprised," Marina said from the screen, a faint, mirthless smile playing on her lips. "I suppose you thought I was just some common person you could push around. You judged me based on my clothes and the color of my skin, and you decided I wasn't worthy of the service my own company promises to provide." She leaned closer to her camera. "Yesterday, you made a decision based on your discretion. Today, I'm going to make a few decisions based on mine. Mr. Maxwell, please proceed." Robert Maxwell picked up a thick file. "Miss Price, Mr. Bishop, Your employment with Zenith Airlines is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct. The words hit them like a physical blow, but it was only the beginning. The trap hadn't just been sprung. It was now tightening with excruciating, methodical precision. The full weight of their actions and the full power of the woman they had wronged was about to come crashing down upon them. The silence that followed Robert Maxwell's introduction was a physical entity. It filled the boardroom, thick and suffocating, pressing down on Bernadette Price and Gregory Bishop. For a long, suspended moment, their minds refused to process the information. It was a glitch in reality, a sentence that made no sense. The woman on the screen, the woman they had belittled, dismissed, and cast out, was the architect of their entire world, the invisible, celestial power whose name was on their paychecks. Bernadette's breath hitched in her throat. The carefully constructed confidence she'd worn into the building crumbled into dust, revealing the raw panic beneath. Her world had been turned upside down and shaken so violently that the pieces would never fit back together. Greg's face, which had been pale, was now a ghastly, mottled grey. He stared at Marina's high-definition image, his mouth slightly agape, a small, wheezing sound escaping his lips. He was seeing not just a CEO, but the ghost of his own monumental arrogance, returned to pass judgment. The other executives at the table remained perfectly still, their faces impassive. They were predators who had cornered their prey, and were now content to simply watch them tremble before the final strike. "You seem surprised," Marina said from the screen, her voice calm and lethally precise. "I suppose you thought I was just some common person you could push around. You judged me based on my clothes and the color of my skin, and in a matter of minutes, you decided I wasn't worthy of the service my own company promises to provide. Yesterday, you made a decision based on your discretion. Today, I'm going to make a few decisions based on mine. Mr. Maxwell, please proceed." Robert Maxwell, his expression grim, picked up a thick file folder and slid it to the center of the table. "Miss Price, Mr. Bishop," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your employment with Zenith Airlines is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct." The words, though expected at this point, landed with the force of a physical blow, but they were merely the overture to a symphony of ruin. Penelope Shaw, the head of legal, took the floor. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words were instruments of surgical destruction. "Let's be very clear about what termination for gross misconduct entails," she said, her eyes fixed on Greg. "According to Section 11, subsection B of your management contract, such a termination results in the immediate forfeiture of all severance pay, accrued vacation time, and any unvested stock options. The same applies to you, Ms. Price." She paused, letting the financial reality sink in. "Furthermore, Gregory, your pension, your 30 years of service have been noted. However, your actions, specifically the systematic and deliberate suppression of at least 17 formal customer complaints against Ms. Price, constitute a profound breach of your fiduciary duty to protect this company. You did not protect it. You actively exposed it to harm. Therefore, your pension agreement is rendered null and void." Greg made a choking sound, slumping in his chair as if his spine had been removed. His pension wasn't just money. It was his retirement, his boat, his golden years, the entire narrative of his life's work. It had just been vaporized. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You can't. The union will crucify you for this." It was a desperate, reflexive grasp for a shield that was no longer there. Penelope's expression did not change. I took the liberty of speaking with your union president, Mr. Coleman, this morning at 7 a.m. I provided him with a secure link to the complete evidence package, the unedited video from 4 separate angles, the full audio recording from the gate, the digital log of every passenger you allowed to board who was in violation of your imaginary dress code, and the complete file on the complaints you buried. After an hour of review, Mr. Coleman informed me that while the union is obligated to provide you with counsel, they have officially advised you, and I quote, to accept whatever is offered and walk away quietly before Zenith Airlines decides to file a civil suit against you personally for damages to its brand. Bernadette finally broke. The last vestige of her composure shattered, and she began to sob. Not quiet tears of remorse, but the loud, gasping cries of a cornered animal. "Please," she begged, her voice thick and pleading, as she looked wildly around the table. "It was a mistake, just one mistake. I was having a bad day. I was stressed. The flight was overbooked. I have a mortgage. I have kids in college. Please, you can't do this." From the screen, Marina's voice cut through the desperate sobs, sharp and unforgiving as a shard of glass. "A bad day?" Marina asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Do not dare to reduce your bigotry to a bad day. You humiliated me. You made a public spectacle of me with a smirk on your face. Do you have any idea how many nights I spent sleeping on a couch in a tiny office to get the seed money for this company? Do you know how many boardrooms I've had to fight my way through, facing men who looked at me with that same dismissive contempt you did? I built this airline, this global enterprise, on the foundational principle of bringing people together, of creating excellence that was accessible to everyone. You took the thing I am most proud of in this world, and you twisted it into a cheap weapon for your own petty, ugly prejudice. She leaned closer to her camera, her eyes boring into Bernadette's. You didn't have a bad day. You revealed who you are. And that person, Ms. Price, has absolutely no place in my company. The HR director, a man named Peterson, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. Security will escort you to your lockers to collect your personal effects. You will then be escorted from the building. Your ID badges and system access have been deactivated. Your final paychecks will be mailed to your homes. It was the cold, sterile language of corporate execution. As 2 uniformed security guards entered the room, their presence a final, stark confirmation of their disgrace, Gregory Bishop rose unsteadily to his feet. One last, pathetic surge of defiance coursed through him. He pointed a trembling finger at Marina's image on the screen. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his face contorted in a mask of impotent rage. "I'll go to the press. I'll tell them everything. How this cold, ruthless new management is destroying the soul of this airline, firing loyal, hard-working employees over a simple misunderstanding." A low, humorless laugh emanated from the screen. "Please do, Gregory. I sincerely invite you to," Marina said, her voice dripping with icy confidence. "But let me paint a picture for you of how that day will go. You'll sit down with a journalist, and you'll tell your story. And then we will release our statement, along with the unedited, high-definition video of you looming over a passenger. We will release the crystal-clear audio of your voice, dripping with condescension as you offer to punish her with a seat in economy. We will release the sworn affidavits from the dozen minority passengers whose legitimate complaints about your gate agent you personally covered up. We will release your complete performance review history. You think you'll be a whistleblower, Gregory? You will be a meme by noon and a pariah by nightfall. The press won't see a loyal employee. They'll see a bully who got exactly what he deserved. Your 15 minutes of fame will be your eternal damnation. So please, go to the press. You will be doing my marketing department a favor." The fight drained out of Greg's eyes, replaced by the vacant, hollow look of utter defeat. He was not just fired, he was neutered, his last threat exposed as a pathetic bluff. The karma that followed was not swift and fiery, but slow, grinding, and absolute. The story did leak, but from a junior executive so inspired by Marina's integrity that he sent the anonymous tip himself. The narrative that went viral wasn't one of a ruthless CEO, but of a brilliant leader holding her own company to the highest standard. Zenith Justice became a global trend. For Bernadette, the fallout was a daily torment. Her name, face, and address were plastered across social media. Her phone buzzed constantly with hateful messages. One morning, she saw her own tear-streaked face on a tabloid website under the headline, "Airport Karen fired by CEO she bullied." Neighbors she'd known for years would abruptly turn and walk the other way when they saw her in the grocery store aisle. The aviation industry, a surprisingly small and tight-knit world, blacklisted her. Within 3 months, drowning in debt and ostracized by her community, she sold her home for a loss and moved to a small, rented apartment 2 states away, her old life nothing more than a ghost. For Gregory Bishop, the unraveling was even more methodical. Marina's directive to rip out the infection had triggered a full forensic audit of the JFK station he managed. Penelope Shaw's team, in searching for evidence of his discriminatory practices, stumbled upon a pattern of financial corruption, small, fraudulent overtime claims, service invoices from vendors that were suspiciously inflated, a trail of minor kickbacks. It was the grubby, commonplace corruption of a man who believed he was untouchable. Zenith Airlines promptly filed a civil suit against him to recoup every stolen dollar. Drowning in legal fees he could no longer afford, facing a lawsuit from a corporation with bottomless resources, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. The house, the savings, the pride, it all vanished. He went from a smug station manager, a king in his small kingdom, to a broken, penniless man, forever defined by the day he picked a fight with the wrong woman in joggers. In the months that followed, the incident at JFK became a piece of corporate folklore within Zenith Airlines, a cautionary tale whispered in break rooms and training sessions. It was referred to internally as the B-24 reckoning. New hires were told the story of the 2 employees who, in a single afternoon of breathtaking arrogance, had committed career suicide by trying to humiliate the disguised owner of the company. The legend painted Marina Worth as a figure of swift, almost mythical retribution. But for Marina herself, the satisfaction was never in the revenge. The firing of Gregory Bishop and Bernadette Price had been a necessary, but ultimately hollow, act of housekeeping. It was cleaning up a spill. It did nothing to fix the faulty pipe that caused it. The real work, the work that truly mattered, began the moment the boardroom door closed behind them. While the internet churned with memes and think pieces about the incident, Marina was already initiating the most ambitious and difficult project of her career, the Phoenix Protocol. The name was deeply personal, chosen during a late-night strategy session with Donovan Reed. It was to be a complete corporate renewal, a program designed to let the old, complacent Zenith burn away, so that a stronger, more principled airline could rise from its ashes. Her first act was to address the world, and she began by tearing up the first 3 drafts her public relations team brought her. They were masterpieces of corporate non-apology, filled with phrases like, "We are reviewing our policies," and "an isolated incident." They were designed to minimize liability. Marina saw them as a continuation of the lie, This wasn't an isolated incident, she told her stunned PR chief, tossing the papers onto the mahogany table. It was an inevitable one. The system allowed it to happen. The only thing that was unique is that it happened to me. I'm not minimizing anything. That night, in her Chicago penthouse, overlooking the glittering city lights, she wrote the statement herself. It was not a press release. It was a letter. Raw, direct, and stripped of all pretense. It was published as a full-page ad in the nation's leading newspapers and posted as an open letter on all Zenith's digital platforms. It began not with an apology, but with a story. Her story. Yesterday, I was denied a seat on a flight I paid for. I was told my clothes were too common. I was condescended to, disrespected, and threatened. This happened to me, the founder and CEO of this company, she wrote. The words were a lightning bolt, cutting through the usual corporate fog. That fact is not something I am proud of. It is a source of profound shame. It forces me to ask a painful, necessary question. How many times has this happened to our customers who don't have the power to convene an emergency board meeting from the terminal? How many people have walked away from one of our gates feeling humiliated, unseen, and powerless? The letter sent shockwaves through the business world. It was a radical act of transparency. She then announced the Phoenix Protocol, outlining its 3 core pillars. First, she declared a complete overhaul of employee training. Zenith Airlines, she announced, was entering into a multi-year partnership with the NAACP and a leading civil rights advocacy firm, Fair Skies Initiative. Together, they would design a new, mandatory and immersive Dignity and Service program. Every single one of Zenith's 50,000 employees, from baggage handlers in Dallas to pilots in Dubai, from the call center staff to the senior VPs on her own floor, would be required to complete it. This wasn't going to be a 1-hour PowerPoint presentation on diversity. It was an intensive, multi-day course involving rigorous role-playing, de-escalation techniques, and education on the history and impact of implicit bias. Anonymized case studies would be used, including the transcript from Gate B24. Second, she relinquished a measure of the company's own power by announcing the formation of an independent civilian complaint review board. This external body, comprised of passenger advocates, legal experts, and civil rights leaders, would have the authority to review and, if necessary, overturn Zenith's internal decisions on passenger complaints. It was a move her legal team had initially balked at, warning of the precedent it would set. Good, Marina had replied. Let this be the precedent. Accountability is not a threat, it's a promise. Finally, she tore up the old, ambiguous rule book. In its place, she commissioned the creation of a Zenith Passenger Bill of Rights. This was not a dense legal document, but a simple, clear pledge printed on a card in every seatback pocket and displayed as a permanent plaque at every gate worldwide. It outlined, in plain language, what every passenger could expect: to be treated with respect, to be judged only by their conduct, not their appearance, and to have a clear, transparent path for recourse if they were not. The internal reaction was a predictable mix of applause and quiet mutiny. Many employees, especially younger staff, were energized and proud. They shared Marina's letter with a sense of purpose. But a vocal minority of veterans, the old guard Greg and Bernadette had felt they represented, saw it as a capitulation. They grumbled in private forums about woke nonsense and the fear of walking on eggshells. Marina's response was characteristically direct. She announced a company-wide town hall and addressed the resistance head-on. I understand that change can be uncomfortable, she said, her image broadcast to terminals and offices around the globe, so I am going to be very clear about our direction. This is who we are now, This is our promise to the world and to each other. If you do not believe in this promise, if you are not willing to commit to it with your whole heart, then this is no longer the right place for you. She followed it up with a generous voluntary severance package, open for 1 month to any employee who wished to take it. It was a quiet exodus. Hundreds of employees, those who longed for the old days of discretionary power, took the offer and departed. They were replaced by a new wave of talent, people who had read Marina's letter and actively sought out Zenith because of what it now stood for. The soul of the company was undergoing a transfusion. 6 months to the day after the incident, Marina stood on stage at the Zenith Annual Leadership Summit in a cavernous ballroom. The mood was electric, a stark contrast to the grim, fearful crisis meeting of half a year ago. Before she spoke, Donovan Reed presented the 6-month metrics of the Phoenix Protocol. The numbers on the giant screen behind him were stunning. Customer satisfaction was up 18%. Positive media mentions had quadrupled. Employee turnover was at an all-time low, while applications for new positions had tripled. Their corporate accounts, once rattled, had not only stayed, but had increased their contracts, citing Zenith's ethical stance as a key factor. The European acquisition had been finalized, and the new brand, built on this foundation of trust, was dominating the transatlantic market. When Marina stepped up to the podium, the room rose in a deafening standing ovation. She waited for it to subside, her expression calm and thoughtful. 6 months ago, 2 of our employees made a terrible decision, she began, her voice resonating with quiet power. They chose prejudice over professionalism. They chose ego over empathy, and it almost cost us dearly. But their failure gave us a gift, the gift of clarity. It forced us to look in the mirror and ask ourselves who we truly want to be. I remember standing in that terminal, feeling completely powerless, and I promised myself that if I ever had the power to do so, I would make sure no customer of ours ever felt that way again. She looked out at the faces of her managers, her directors, her vice presidents. Today, we are a better company. Not because we have better planes or more routes, but because we have a better soul. We learned that true standards have nothing to do with what a person wears, or where they come from, or what they look like. True standards have everything to do with how a person is treated. Never forget that. The dignity of every single person who steps into our airports and onto our aircraft is our most sacred trust. That is the new standard. That is the Zenith standard. Later that evening, flying back to New York on a commercial Zenith flight, in first class, dressed in comfortable joggers and a sweater, she watched a gate agent kindly help a flustered elderly couple find their seats. She saw a flight attendant kneel to speak to a frightened child. She saw professionalism infused with a genuine warmth and respect that hadn't been there before. It was in these small, quiet moments that she felt the true victory. The applause in the ballroom was for the CEO. But this quiet, observable reality was the legacy of the woman who had been wronged. She had taken a moment of profound personal humiliation and forged it into a lasting, institutional grace. And in the smooth, steady ascent of the aircraft, leaving the city lights behind, she finally felt a sense of peace. She had not just reshaped her kingdom, she had given it a conscience. Dr. Marina Worth's story is more than just a satisfying tale of karma hitting back. It's a powerful testament to turning a moment of deep personal injustice into a force for sweeping, positive change. She could have simply fired those 2 employees and moved on, but she recognized the problem was a symptom of a much deeper disease. Instead of just seeking revenge, she chose reformation. She surgically removed the cancer within her own company and rebuilt it on a foundation of respect, accountability, and genuine service. This story reminds us that true power isn't about humiliating those who wrong us. It's about having the vision and the courage to build a world where such wrongs are no longer possible. If you believe in stories where justice isn't just served, but becomes a catalyst for making things better for everyone, then hit that like button. Share this video to spread the message that respect is non-negotiable in the air and everywhere else. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story of consequence and character. In the comments below, let us know, what's the most important change Dr. Worth made in her company? We'd love to hear your thoughts.